So let me just share my screen with you. And let me know if you don't see.
All good.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to talk about harms in rheumatology. My name is Dorthe Berthelsen. I'm from Denmark, and as you probably heard, I have a background as a physiotherapist and has also been involved in some safety work. And currently, I'm doing my PhD within OMERACT, and therefore I'm here to tell you about our research within patient-reported safety. First, I have no conflicts of interest. Let me start by introducing you to OMERACT. OMERACT stands for Outcome Measures in Rheumatology and was founded in 1992. And the motivation for OMERACT was a discussion between Martin Bors and Peter Tocqueville, where they compared the outcome used in European and North American clinical trials in rheumatoid arthritis. And by doing that, they noticed that the trials used different endpoints. OMERACT is an international organization of researchers, clinicians, regulatory authorities, and industry representatives. And since 1992, OMERACT has also actively involved patients and caregivers. OMERACT has developed core outcome sets for many different rheumatological conditions, and a core outcome set is a minimum consensus-based set of outcome domains that should be measured and reported in all clinical trials and observational studies of a specific health condition or specific intervention. OMERACT has also inspired establishment of other initiatives, such as the COMET initiatives, which might also be familiar to some of you. And currently, there are 35 working groups within OMERACT, and one of them is the Safety Working Group. We have members from all over the world, and the steering group consists of chairs from 3 different continents, of 1 emerging leader and 2 patient research partners. And currently we have 68 working group members. And it is mandatory to include patient research partners, or PIPs, as we call them, in all working groups and in all steering groups in OMERACT. And the PIPs are involved in all steps of the process of developing core outcome sets. Okay, there are many terms for the issues that we are talking about today. As you probably know, the concert harm statement encourages us to use the term harms, as harms are the totality of possible adverse consequences, and also because harms are the direct opposite of benefits against which they must be compared. However, patients prefer the term side effects. So all of these different terms, side effects, harms, adverse event safety, has over the years caused a lot of discussions in our group. For example, we are a safety working group, not a harm working group, because safety is also a term preferred by patients. So we tend to use the terms that patients prefer. Okay, let me tell you a bit about why we're doing what it is we're doing. In clinical trials, side effects are reported through the lens of clinicians and researchers. However, the patient voice is lacking. But from cancer research, we know that patients report symptoms earlier and more frequently than clinicians. But clinicians' reports are more significantly associated with death and emergency room admissions. And therefore, patients' and clinicians' reports are complementary. Patients and clinicians, they also have different perspectives on side effects. And in this study, 604 patients scored the importance of side effects from glucocorticoids. And results showed that patients rated symptoms such as weight gain, insomnia, and mood phase as being more important than cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and infections, which clinicians usually consider to be clinically important and being serious adverse events. Also, there's no standard for collection of patients' own reports of side effects. In clinical trials, In this clinical trial, they compared two groups that were asked different open-ended questions of side effects, and one group that was giving a checklist. And 13 to 14% of those being given an open-ended question reported at least one side effect, but 77% of those being given a checklist reported one or more side effects. So when collection methods are not standardized, and we are having problems when we're trying to synthesize trial results in meta-analysis. So these different perspectives and different collection methods, that is why the OMERACT Safety Working Group is developing a patient-reported outcome measure for patient-reported harms. When you develop core outcome sets the OMERACT way, you first decide on what domains you want to measure. And then you decide on how to measure these domains. So let me explain how we have developed domains. Following the OMERACT way of developing core domain sets, you go through 3 steps. First, you generate some possible domains. Then you agree on which domains might be relevant. And finally, you vote for the most important ones. So let me show you how we have generated domains. We have been focusing on patients with inflammatory arthritis and on side effects from medical treatment in clinical trials. As a first step, we talked to patients about their concern over side effects, and the results were presented and discussed at the OMERACT conference back in 2018. And there was consensus that patients and clinicians have different perspectives on side effects. So, as a next step, we searched for existing outcome measures that could be used for patients' own safety reporting. And we did find 7 instruments, but only 4 of them provided the patient perspectives. And the language and content of these were not clear and comprehensive. So therefore, we had to conclude that the ideal way to assess harms from the patient perspective has not yet been found. As we didn't really have any luck with our scoping review, we then conducted a systematic literature review where we searched for adverse events reported in clinical trials. And we found 117 harm clusters that were appropriate for patients' own reports. But sadly, only 9% of those identified side effects reported severity. At the same time, our Canadian colleagues, they conducted a survey where they used the PRO-CTCAE. The PRO-CTCAE is a cancer-specific instrument that consists of 80 symptoms. And 560 patients with RA responded to these symptoms and gave suggestions for new symptoms. So we merged these results with results from our systematic literature review. And further, the OMERACT glucocorticoid group, they searched for studies related to the patient's perspective or side effects to glucocorticoid treatment. So we added harmful outcomes that were not already identified in our previous studies to these results. And in that way, we ended up having a list of 135 symptomatic side effects. So to categorize these side effects, we again looked into the PRO-CTCAE, and we also looked into a Dutch study from De Beers et al., which suggested several later midterms. And with help from 2 of our patient research partners in our group, we then developed 12 overall categories, in which we then could categorize the 135 symptomatic side effects. As a next step, we then conducted some focus groups and individual interviews. The aim of the focus group was to explore what patients consider important to know about potential side effects before they start a new medical treatment. And in the individual interviews, patients then gave us their perspectives on our list of side effects. Overall, we had 34 participants. 9 of them were from Australia, 14 from Europe, and 11 from North America. Now, let's have a look at what we learned from the focus groups. From the focus groups, patients said to us that the impact on life was very important to them. And that covered both their daily life, their family life, their work life, and their social life. The patients also explained that both the physical and the mental aspect was important to them. And the physical aspect, it covered limitation to do physical function or their ability to do daily tasks due to side effects. And some participants, they also reported experiences of their doctors not believing the severity of their physical symptoms. The mental aspects included both emotional dysregulation, such as having, for example, mood swings, but also a more overall mental state of feeling low due to the impact on side effects. The participants, they also saw time and energy and the economic burden as side effects. Time and energy covered if they had to have, for example, extra blood tests taken, but also if they had to go more regular to see the clinic or hospital because they might experience some side effects. They also considered if they had to go to see other doctors, have additional contacts with other healthcare professionals to be time and energy consuming. They also explained that the impact of the economic burden was if they had to pay for their rheumatological medication, but also if they suffered side effects and needed additional medication that they also had to pay for. The participants, they also suggested that the duration, severity, and frequency was important measurement issues. And there was also quite a lot of other important issues to patients, but these are covered by other OMERACT groups. So the safety working group will not explore them any further. But some of the other aspects included the risk of drug failure, the potential long-term effects was also important to them, and so was the impact of other diseases and drugs. And that might also be related to contextual factors, such as, for example, ethnicity or having positive or negative beliefs or worries about side effects. But overall, there was two issues that were really important to patients. One was the balance between benefit and harms. And the other one was the cumulative burden of having multiple side effects at the same time, or the persistence of side effects over time. Okay, so now let's have a look at what we learned from the individual interviews. These are the 12 overall categories that were discussed with patients in the individual interviews. And each category consists of several subcategories, and within each subcategories, then the items of symptomatic side effects are included. Patients, they also suggested new side effects that they felt was lacking. And all in all, we discussed 171 side effects with patients in the interviews. Let me show you just an example of what patients said, just to give you an idea of the discussions. In the categories of brain and nerves, mood and emotions, and sleep, we had several overlaps. So let's use them as an example. First, this is the specific side effects related to brain and nerves. And when discussing this category, some patients, they asked why there was no sleep or no fatigue in here. When we then discussed the category of sleep, some participants also wondered why fatigue was in there, and some said that it might go better on the brain. On the other hand, others felt that sleepiness might be more overlapping to fatigue, tiredness, and lack of energy, and therefore should be kept within the category of sleep. So this is the category of mood and emotions. And excessive thoughts was an example of a side effect that was suggested by patients, but some said that it might fit better into sleep or into brain. Others, on the other hand, saw that excessive thought would be overlapping to over-optimistic feelings, maniac, being full of ideas, and then felt it was more related to mood and emotions. When we discussed the categories of brain and nerves, some also said that they associated paranoia more with mood and emotions. And it was also mentioned that sensing things that are not real might be the same as paranoia. And loss of identity is an example of an item that was not clear to patients. Patients said that if it meant that you were completely forgetting who you are, then it might go fine on the brain. But if it's more like a feeling of losing your identity, then it would go better with the motions. So these are just some examples of what patients said to us in the individual interviews. And as we had now generated a lot of knowledge about a domain, we could then proceed to agreeing and voting. And we did that at the OMERACT conference in Colorado Springs 2 years ago. At the conference, we had a safety special interest group meeting where we presented our results, and there were some issues that were discussed at our meeting. There were mainly 3 overall issues. One of them was whether we could have a single overall measure for patients' own safety reporting. We also discussed whether we could do a process of binning and winnowing, aiming for a reduced number of symptoms in our very long list. And we also discussed whether patients would be willing to use such a safety instrument. Further, we conducted a poll asking whether the meeting participants agreed that we had gathered enough data to move forward to the next stage. And 96% agreed that we could move forward. 4% said, I don't know, but nobody disagreed. And after the meeting, we also published a definition of our domain of patient perception of safety. And that is an outcome that represents the patient voice evaluating the symptomatic treatment-related adverse events for people with rheumatic and musculoskeletal conditions enrolled in clinical trials. This would include severity, frequency, and interference of symptoms, i.e. distant from signs from different body systems. As we now had identified a domain, we could move from a domain selection and into the instrument selection phase. So in this phase, we have been working on 2 overall projects. We have been working on a single item measure and a multi-item measure. And we are working with developers of the PRO CTCAE on the multi-item measure, which would be the ideal to have, but that project is still in the protocol stage. So therefore, I will not dig any further into that today. Recently, we have been focusing on our single item measure, and we are proud that we now have some results that we can share with you from that one. We have conducted 2 studies in the single item project. We have investigated the validity of a single item measure of bother to side effects, and we have also conducted a match feasibility survey of some candidate instruments of bother or trouble to side effects. The validity study builds on data from our Canadian colleagues who previously conducted this web-based survey of adults with self-identified RA. And in that survey, participants were asked to identify the presence or absence of the itchy symptoms in the PRO CTCAE. But they were also asked to evaluate how much they were bothered overall by side effects using a modified cancer-validated measure, this GP5 item from the FACET library. And in our study, we have used multiple corresponding analysis, which is a way to find patterns in data to transform the side effects into dimensions. And a dimension represents an underlying pattern that sort of summarizes how side effects might vary between or across patients. We had 560 participants in our study, and they reported having 17 side effects currently and being overall somewhat bothered by side effects. And the results showed that we had one clear dimension or one clear pattern that explained over 17% of the variance in our data. And as you may be able to see from this figure, each of the symptoms only contributes a little bit to this pattern. And that means we do not have to worry about any other constructs, such as dealing with just neurological side effects or just GI side effects. We have one latent variable or one side effect burden score, and that supports the use of a single item measure. So if we now have a look at the other single item projects that we have been doing, the match and feasibility survey, then this project builds on results from the focus groups, where we have investigated whether the impact on life and the cumulative burden can be covered by a single item measure of bother or trouble from side effects. First, we searched the literature and we identified 6 candidate instruments. And these instruments we used in the survey, where we asked whether any of the instruments were a match with the impact on life and a match with the cumulative burden. We also asked whether any of the instruments were feasible, and participants were also allowed to give comments to the instruments, and they were also asked to rank the instruments. We then invited all the members from the safety working group and all the patients who were planning to attend the OMERACT conference earlier this year into the survey. And we had overall 48 participants in our survey. 23 were patients and 25 were non-patients. These are the results from our ranking. And instrument number 1 appeared to be most preferred, followed by instrument number 6 and instrument number 4. Now, let's have a look at the results from the match and feasibility part. All the estimates you see here include responses of yes, I agree and uncertain. And the results showed that instrument number 1, 2, 3, and 4 appeared to be provisionally endorsed as capturing the cumulative burden. And these are the results in groups of patient research partners and non-patient research partners. And they showed that the patients would provisionally endorse instrument number 2 and 3, while non-PIPs would provisionally endorse instrument number 1 and 4. So there is not agreement on which instrument to select. For impact on life, no one of the instruments would be endorsed except that the non-PIPs would provisionally endorse instrument number 3. However, everybody seemed to agree that all the instruments were feasible. So now let's have a look at the comments to see why any of the instruments weren't clearly endorsed. And we analyzed the comments using a large language model with this prompt in Microsoft Copilot. Please provide an abstract for these statements, and then we listed all the statements for the specific instrument. And then we got these results for instrument number 1. We were giving a list of key issues, such as lack of clear language and timescales. The term bothersome might not be broad enough, and the potential exclusion of beneficial effects. And we also got some suggestions from improvements. We did the same for all of the 6 instruments, and reading through all of the results, we realized that many of the concerns were similar across the instruments. And therefore, we decided to use a new prompt. Please provide an abstract for statements of all of the 6 instruments. And then we got this list of common challenges. And we also got a list of suggestions for improvements. And based on that, we therefore wondered if the Copilot could help us even further on the way. So we decided to use a new prompt. These are the 6 instruments that were accessed. And then we typed in all the instruments. Please give me the best suggestion for a modified question with response items and timeframes based on these instruments and statements given for the 6 instruments. Then we got this modified question and these response options. And we discussed these modifications, and we agreed that this item might better cover the patient perspectives than any of the original 6 ones. But we also had more help from Copilot, because Copilot gave us some reasons why this modification would work. For example, all modifications might better cover the cumulative burden. Using other terms than bother might better cover the impact on life. And having more contrast between response options might be more effectively, especially using extremely instead of very much. But we then also realized that the parentheses included a term that might be limited to some. And therefore, we asked another prompt. I want to ask people one question that most can agree in considering the 6 instruments. What should I ask? We then got this suggestion. Over the past 2 weeks, considering all the medication you take to manage your condition, how much have the side effects impacted your daily life? Not at all, a little, moderately, quite a bit, and extremely. We also got these explanations for why it would work. However, we felt that was some very important issues that we had discussed many times in the safety working group, and that was also mentioned in the comments, and we felt that was left out. And that was the potential exclusion of beneficial effects. So therefore, we asked one more prompt. If I want to focus on negative impact, what should I ask? We then got this one. Over the past 2 weeks, how much have side effects from your medication negatively impacted your daily life, including your ability to function, work, socialize, or feel well? Not at all, a little, moderately, quite a bit, and severely. And this might look familiar to you. At least it did to me. I was particularly happy to see this part. And let me explain why. If we look at what patients had told us in the focus group that was important to them, then they had mentioned to us that daily life was important. They also said ability to function, work, socialize, feel well, impact on life. And we just learned that focus on all medication might better cover the cumulative burden, and focus on negative impact might better allow us to distinguish benefit from harms. So with this modification, we then noticed that extremely has been replaced with severity, and that might be less of a contrast. So therefore, we decided to compare this modification to the previous one, and then we merged the first part of this one with the last part of this one, and then we added these response options. And then we got a clear instrument that covered a lot of the things that patients have told us was important to them in the focus groups. These results we then presented and discussed at the special interest group meeting at the OMERACT conference earlier this year. And the main points from the discussion were whether the 2-week recall period was sufficient, or whether, for example, 1 week would be better. We also discussed the use of artificial intelligence, as this, to the best of our knowledge, is the first pro instruments that has been developed with the use of AI technology. But we also agreed that the time frame needs to be further evaluated. We also conducted a poll where we asked, do you agree that a single item measure is feasible? And to that, 97% of the meeting participants agreed. 3% said, I don't know, but nobody disagreed. We further asked, do we agree that we could proceed with modifying a measure that builds on input from the match and feasibility survey? And 91% agreed in that one. 9% said, I don't know, but again, nobody disagreed. So I hope this has given you an idea of our current status in developing a patient-reported outcome measure for patient-reported harms. And let me just stop sharing my screen.